Frank didn't wake up that morning expecting anything unusual. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and the neighborhood looked exactly like it had every day for the past 41 years. He pulled open the curtains like he always did, left side first, then right, and made his way to the kitchen for a cup of instant coffee. Just like always, the quiet in the house had long since stopped bothering him. It had been 5 years since Judy passed. In the early days, the silence was deafening. Now it was just silence. Not heavy, not light, just there, like the ticking of the old clock above the stove. A sound he heard, but never really listened to anymore. He shuffled toward the table, the mug warming his fingers. The paper was already folded neatly by the edge of the counter. Jacob, his son, always made sure it was delivered. Frank liked it that way. He didn't care for news on screens. The feel of real paper between his hands gave him something to do while the coffee cooled down just enough not to burn. But as he scanned the headlines, he blinked. Once, then twice. The words were blurry. He rubbed his eyes. Blinked again. Still blurry. It wasn't unusual for his eyes to act up in the morning. He was 68 after all. But usually after a minute or two, the world would come back into focus. This time it didn't. Everything remained foggy, like someone had smeared his glasses with butter. He stood slowly, using the counter for balance. His legs felt unsteady, not quite there, like his knees were unsure of how to hold him up. His heart started to beat faster, not racing, but irregular. Thud, 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 pause, thud. He sat down, and then the fear crept in. The kind of fear that didn't shout. The kind that whispered something is wrong. He didn't call anyone. Frank Thomas wasn't the kind of man to call people over a little off morning. But he also didn't pick up the paper again. He just sat there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the stove clock, and his own heartbeat echoing inside his ears. He thought about Judy. If she were here, she'd know what to do. She always did. She'd brush his hair out of his eyes, hand him a glass of water, and insist, gently but firmly, that he go get checked out. She had a way of getting him to listen without ever raising her voice. That thought alone made his eyes sting. He stood up again, slower this time, and walked to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face, stared at himself in the mirror, and tried to shrug it off. But the mirror didn't lie. His eyes looked glassy. His skin looked pale. He didn't want to admit it, but something wasn't right. He opened the cabinet and popped 2 aspirin, just in case, he told himself. He sat back down, sipped his coffee, waited, still dizzy, still foggy. Just then, tires crunched on gravel. Jacob, his oldest son, always dropping by on Sundays without calling, just like his mother used to. Frank was too tired to pretend he was fine. Jacob stepped through the back door like he always had, holding a bag of bagels and wearing that same look he always wore when he visited. Half smile, half checklist. A man with love in his bones, but responsibility in his hands. Hey, Dad, brought your favorite, cinnamon raisin. Frank didn't respond right away, just looked up at his son, blinking slowly. Jacob frowned. You okay? Frank opened his mouth, but the words felt slow. I don't know, he admitted. Things are a little blurry. That was all Jacob needed to hear. 10 minutes later, Frank was in the passenger seat of Jacob's car, trying not to look scared. The drive to the urgent care was mostly silent, except for the sound of the blinker and the low hum of the radio. Frank's thoughts raced in every direction. What if it was a stroke? A heart problem? Something worse? The waiting room was cold. The walls beige. The nurse had a kind face but moved quickly. Finger prick. Blood pressure cuff. A clipboard's worth of questions. He heard her pause after one of the readings. She left the room and returned with the doctor. The doctor's voice was calm, but serious. Mr. Thomas, your blood sugar is 317. Frank blinked. He didn't know what that number meant, not really. He just knew it was high. The doctor continued, we'll run a few more tests, but you're likely looking at a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, possibly even advanced prediabetes. You've probably been running high for a while. Frank felt something crack inside. Not pain, not shock, something else. Shame. How could he have let this happen? He thought of his secret stash in the garage, those candy bars behind the toolbox, the late-night bowls of ice cream, the cookies, the pie, the sweet tea, the one more treat that became routine. He thought it didn't matter. He thought it was just part of aging. He thought, I deserve it. He didn't know it could hurt him like this. The doctor kept talking, explaining A1C, insulin resistance, lifestyle changes. Frank nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, drifting between regret and disbelief. Jacob looked concerned, not angry, just worried. The kind of worried that says, I don't want to lose you. Frank didn't sleep well that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the numbers echoing in his head. 317, 8.2. High, dangerously high. The next morning, he opened the fridge and stared into it like it was a stranger's. Gone were the sweet drinks, the prepackaged treats, the easy comfort foods. In their place were vegetables, lean meats, almond milk, and something called chia pudding that Jacob insisted was good for him. Frank didn't feel good. He felt grumpy, hungry, and sad. Sad in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the funeral. Because now sugar wasn't just sugar. It was Judy's birthday cake. It was Christmas morning cinnamon rolls. It was the ice cream they shared at the fair, sitting on a bench, watching the sunset like teenagers. It was memories. It was comfort. It was love. And now it was a threat. He spent that first week angry. Not at anyone, but at the universe. At his own body. At aging. At grief. At how easily a man can slide into something without noticing, until it's too late. But he stuck with the changes. He walked around the block every morning, knees aching the first 5 minutes, then easing up by the time he reached the mailbox. He swapped sugar for cinnamon, white bread for whole grain, creamy dressings for olive oil and vinegar. He started reading labels. He started drinking more water. He started writing things down in a notebook, a habit Judy had tried to get him into years ago. He called it his Strong Days journal. Every time he made a healthy choice, he logged it. Day 4, drank 8 glasses of water. No candy. Day 6, walked 1.2 miles. Eggs and spinach for breakfast. Day 10, refused pie at bingo night. Wanted it. Didn't need it. The cravings didn't vanish, but they lost their power. But the journey wasn't linear. There were days Frank wanted to throw the notebook in the trash. Days when the kale sat untouched in the fridge and the sound of a neighbor baking filled his house with temptation. Days when grief hit him so hard that the idea of cooking a balanced meal felt laughable. One Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks in, he stood in front of the pantry, staring at a jar of butterscotch hard candies. It had been a gift from his granddaughter. Still sealed, still untouched, but now somehow glowing like gold. His hand hovered over the lid. Just one. Just to taste it. Just a reminder of sweeter times. And then he saw it, Judy's handwriting, still taped to the inside of the cabinet. Don't forget to breathe. You're doing better than you think. She'd written that during his last major flu. Taped it up so he'd see it while making tea. And he never took it down. He exhaled, hand trembling slightly, and let the jar be. That night he wrote in the notebook. Day 21. I said no today. That one no felt bigger than all my yes. From that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically, but steadily. Frank stopped treating the process like a punishment. He started experimenting with new foods, even when he couldn't pronounce half the ingredients. He discovered roasted cauliflower tasted better than he expected. He learned that blueberries weren't just good. They were powerful, helping memory and fighting inflammation. He took time to understand what was happening inside his body. He read articles, slowly, with a dictionary nearby. He watched videos from nutritionists who talked like people, not textbooks. He started adding up what he hadn't known. How sugar crept into foods where it didn't belong. Salad dressings, yogurts, even canned beans. It was like his eyes had opened to a hidden world. Not a scary one, but a world that needed his attention. Frank began treating his health not like a chore, but like an act of respect for himself, for Judy's memory, for the time he still had left. He cleaned out the garage, not just to stay busy, but because every time he threw away something old, he felt lighter. He fixed the porch swing, painted the back fence, built a small raised garden bed just off the patio where he grew cherry tomatoes and basil, even though he'd never grown anything before. He started leaving his curtains open a little earlier each morning. Let the light in before the world was awake. His neighbors noticed. "You're looking good, Frank. You lost weight. You're glowing, man. What's your secret?" He laughed at that one. If only they knew the secret started with a blood sugar scare and a jar of candy he didn't open. One Sunday in early spring, something happened that hadn't in a long while. Frank cooked. He used to cook with Judy. Or rather, Judy cooked and he helped. He was the assistant, chopping, peeling, stirring. Since she passed, he rarely stepped into the kitchen for anything beyond breakfast. But that day he made dinner. Not from a box. Not from a microwave. He made roasted salmon with lemon, a quinoa salad with cucumbers and a splash of olive oil. He steamed green beans, lit a candle, set the table for one. It felt strange, almost silly, but it also felt sacred. As he ate, he looked across the table where Judy used to sit. He didn't cry. He smiled, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. That evening, Jacob called. "Hey, Dad, how you feeling?" Frank hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he did. "Better," he said. "Better than I have in a long time." Jacob sounded relieved, not just for the numbers, but for the change he could hear in his father's voice. "Maybe next Sunday you come here instead," Frank added. "I'll cook." Jacob laughed, surprised. "You? Cooking?" "Yep," Frank said. "And no sugar. Don't worry." Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Frank didn't call it a diet anymore. He called it a rhythm. He had his routine. Wake up. Stretch. Drink water. Check the garden. Eat. Walk. Rest. Write. Repeat. And the journal grew thicker. He began to write more than just habits. He wrote reflections, thoughts, emotions, small victories, hard moments. Day 77 had a bad craving. Watched the birds instead. Day 94 felt lonely today. Called Emily. She made me laugh. That was better than sugar. Day 102, blood pressure steady. Heart strong. I'm still here. Still choosing life. Frank started reading again. Real books. Not just headlines. He reread the notes Judy left around the house. He found one he forgot, tucked into a cookbook. If you're reading this, it means you're trying. And that's more than enough. He framed it and hung it in the kitchen. That message, so small, became his anchor. Because there were still hard days. There were still urges. There were still moments when the silence crept in and whispered lies. You're too old to change. You've missed your chance. What's the point? But Frank had something stronger than sugar. Stronger than regret. He had purpose. Not flashy. Not grand. But grounded. Quiet. Real. One day, Emily came over for a school project. She was learning about family health history. Had to interview someone older. They sat on the swing as the wind rustled the trees. "What would you tell someone my age about health?" she asked, holding up a notepad. Frank looked out at the yard, remembering the man he was 6 months ago. He smiled. "Start small," he said, "and don't wait for a scare to change." Emily scribbled quickly. "And what would you tell someone your age?" she asked. Frank paused, then answered softly, "That it's not too late. It's never too late. You just have to want one more good day. Then another. Then another. That's how you build a life." That night, Frank didn't just write in his journal. He wrote a letter. To himself. To the man he was at the start of the journey. You didn't know it then, but you were stronger than you believed. You didn't need sugar. You needed healing. You didn't need more comfort. You needed more truth. You didn't lose yourself when Judy died. You just forgot where you put the pieces. And now, you're putting them back. One walk, one salad, one choice at a time. He signed it. From your strongest day yet. Musical note. Music swells, warm and gentle. If you saw yourself in Frank, even for a moment, you're not alone. If you've ever reached for something sweet to soften the sharp edges of life, if you've ever told yourself you'd change tomorrow, if you've ever believed it was too late, then hear this. It's not. Your next stronger day doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be yours. You don't need to run a marathon. You don't need to get it all right. You just need to take one kind, honest step forward, and then another. And maybe, like Frank, you'll start to see that healing isn't just about the body. It's about the heart. It's about the story you tell yourself when no one else is listening. Let that story be filled with grace. And let it begin now.